In 1815, as Napoleon's Grande Armée was being crushed at Waterloo, a man in London supposedly knew the outcome before anyone else in England. According to legend, he used carrier pigeons in a network of couriers that outpaced even the British government. While everyone else believed Napoleon had won, this man quietly walked onto the floor of the London Stock Exchange and began selling. Traders panicked, prices collapsed, and when the truth finally arrived that Napoleon had actually lost, he bought everything back at rock-bottom prices, making a fortune in a single afternoon. That man was Nathan Rothschild, and that story has been told in documentaries, passed around conspiracy forums, and repeated as fact for over 200 years. The only problem? Most of it isn't true, at least not the way people tell it. But here's what's strange. The actual story of the Rothschild family is far more interesting than the myth. What they really did wasn't some shadowy market manipulation, it was the invention of modern finance itself. They pioneered international banking when borders were basically war zones. They created communication networks that governments couldn't match. They financed empires, toppled currencies, and built railways across continents. And they did it starting from a ghetto alley so narrow you could touch both walls with outstretched arms. This is the story of how one family built the blueprint for modern money, and it begins in a place that no longer exists. In the late 1700s, Frankfurt's Jewish population was confined to a single street called the Judengasse. This wasn't a neighborhood, it was a wall. Jewish residents couldn't own land outside this lane, couldn't enter certain professions, and couldn't even walk on the main streets during Christian holidays. At its peak, more than 3,000 people lived crammed into a stretch of road about 12 feet wide. Fires were common, disease spread easily, and yet from this suffocating alley, something remarkable emerged. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born here in 1744. His family dealt in coins and rare currency, a trade Jews were permitted because Christians associated money handling with sin. Mayer became obsessed with numismatics, the study and collection of coins. But he wasn't just a collector, he was a connector. He realized that wealthy aristocrats across Europe loved rare coins, and he started cultivating relationships with them through gifts and trades. His breakthrough came when he caught the attention of Prince William of Hesse-Kassel, one of the wealthiest men in Europe. William had made his fortune renting out soldiers. Seriously, he leased Hessian troops to foreign powers, most famously to the British during the American Revolution. By the 1790s, William needed a trusted financial manager, and Mayer Amschel Rothschild positioned himself perfectly. He handled bills, managed currency exchanges, and eventually became indispensable. This is where most people stop the story. But what made the Rothschilds different wasn't serving one prince, it was what Mayer did next. He had 5 sons, and instead of keeping them all in Frankfurt, he sent each one to a different financial capital. Nathan went to London, James went to Paris, Solomon went to Vienna, Karl went to Naples, Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Each son established a bank in his respective city, and each bank was tied to the others through blood, shared capital, and a communication network that nothing else in Europe could rival. The family crest featured 5 arrows bound together, representing the 5 brothers. The message was clear. Individually, they could be broken, but together they were unbreakable. And this wasn't just symbolism. The brothers exchanged letters constantly, using coded language, private couriers, and even carrier pigeons when speed was critical. They knew about troop movements, political upheavals, and market shifts before newspapers, governments, or competitors. This was the first truly international bank in the modern sense. It wasn't just moving money across borders, it was operating as a unified organism across hostile nations during wars, revolutions, and regime changes. While other banks collapsed when their home country destabilized, the Rothschilds simply shifted operations to whichever branch was safest. And then came the Napoleonic Wars, the event that cemented their legend. Here's what people get wrong about Waterloo. The myth goes that Nathan Rothschild learned of Napoleon's defeat a full day before anyone else in England, faked a panic in the stock market, bought everything cheap, and made the equivalent of billions overnight. It's a satisfying story. It confirms every suspicion about secret elites manipulating markets. The only problem is that the historical evidence doesn't support the dramatic version. What the evidence does support is arguably more interesting. Nathan did have an excellent intelligence network. The Rothschilds invested heavily in couriers, and it's documented that they received news from the continent faster than official channels. But the idea that Nathan manipulated the market with false information is almost certainly a later invention, often linked to anti-Semitic pamphlets from the 1840s. What actually happened was slower and smarter. After Waterloo, the British government was drowning in war debt. It had borrowed enormous sums to fund the campaigns against Napoleon, and now it needed to restructure that debt through new bonds. Nathan Rothschild became the dominant player in this bond market. He bought British government bonds when they were cheap and deeply uncertain, and as peace stabilized Europe and bond prices rose, the Rothschilds made fortunes. The real story isn't a single day of manipulation, it's years of carefully positioned bets on political stability. Bets that required better information, faster communication, and deeper pockets than anyone else in the game. This pattern repeated across Europe. The Rothschilds became the go-to financiers for governments that needed to raise money quickly. Austria, France, Prussia, the Papal States all came to the Rothschilds when war debts mounted or infrastructure projects needed funding. And the brothers' network meant they could coordinate across borders in ways no single national bank could match. By the 1850s, the family was financing railway construction across Europe. Railways were the tech boom of that era, enormously expensive, wildly speculative, and essential for any nation that wanted to remain competitive. The Rothschilds funded railways in France, Austria, Belgium, and beyond. They weren't just lending money, they were shaping the physical and economic geography of nations. Perhaps the most dramatic example came in 1875. The Khedive of Egypt, facing bankruptcy, offered to sell his shares in the Suez Canal, the most important shipping passage between Europe and Asia. Britain's Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, wanted those shares, but Parliament wasn't in session to authorize the funds. He turned to Lionel Rothschild, Nathan's son. According to the account, Lionel asked how much was needed. When told it was £4 million, he reportedly replied, "What is your security?" The answer? The British government. Lionel agreed on the spot. Within days, the deal was done. Britain controlled the canal that would define its empire for the next 80 years. This kind of power made the Rothschilds targets, and here's where the uncomfortable history enters. Throughout the 19th century, anti-Semitic publications across Europe seized on the Rothschild name as proof of secret Jewish control over governments and economies. Fabricated documents, exaggerated stories, and outright lies circulated widely. The Waterloo myth, for example, appears to have been amplified by these sources. The Rothschilds weren't just wealthy, they became symbols in propaganda that blamed them for everything from wars to famines. This propaganda had real consequences. It fed into broader anti-Semitic movements that would culminate decades later in the horrors of the 20th century. And it created a template that persists today. The idea that one secret family secretly controls the entire global financial system. But here's where it gets complicated, because while the specific conspiracy theories are false, the underlying anxiety they tap into is real. The Rothschilds did have enormous power. They did influence governments. They did profit from wars. And the structures they helped build, international banking, sovereign debt markets, and the intertwining of private finance and public policy, those structures are still with us. The question isn't whether one family manipulates everything from the shadows. They didn't. The question is whether the financial system they pioneered was ever designed to benefit ordinary people in the first place. Consider the gold connection. For 85 years, from 1919 to 2004, the price of gold was set twice daily in a room at N.M. Rothschild & Sons in London.
This wasn't a conspiracy, it was an official documented process called the London Gold Fix. Representatives of major bullion banks would gather and agree on a benchmark price for gold, and the Rothschilds hosted this meeting and participated in it for nearly a century. When they suddenly withdrew from gold trading in 2004, it raised eyebrows. Some analysts pointed to rising regulatory scrutiny over commodity pricing. Others noted the family had been quietly shifting focus towards other investments. Conspiracy theorists, of course, saw something darker. The truth is probably mundane. The gold market had changed, the Rothschild banking operations had diversified, and hosting the fix had become more of a liability than an asset. But the image stuck. For almost 100 years, one of the most important prices in global finance was literally determined inside a Rothschild office. This brings us to the biggest myth of all, the claim that the Rothschilds are secretly worth $500 trillion or more, controlling every central bank, every war, every currency on Earth. Let's be clear,